Hey fish fans! Today I want to talk about a bit of a taboo subject in the mermaid world, using wheelchairs. Before we get into that though, if you are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe, click the bell if you want to get notified. If you're watching this on Instagram, please hit that follow button, leave a comment, tag a friend who you think might want to learn how to be a professional mermaid. I really appreciate that. So, wheelchairs. There is controversy in the mermaid world, and I would like to tell you my experience as both a person who has chronic pain and invisible disability because of the mobility issues that it causes me, and also someone who's been working as a professional mermaid. It's hard to get around in a mermaid tail safely. You swim, and if you're getting moved from point A to point B, someone carries you or puts you on some sort of apparatus to move you. The reason being is that we don't want to take the costume off in front of the clients, or sometimes there's just quite frankly not enough time. You need to get from point A to point B because you're doing story time at point A, and at point B you're swimming in the pool. So someone's going to take you from story time to the pool really quickly because there actually isn't time for you to change out of that tail and move. Maybe there's an emergency and they've asked the pool be evacuated. Nobody can wait around for you to rip that thing off. They're gonna pull you out of the water and get you out of there. I had two instances in which this happened to me. One, I was at a beach. It started to just suddenly downpour. So the lifeguard said, everybody come in. And I started swimming towards the shore. And the second I got my fins out of the water, Sean hooked me under the arms, pulled me away from the water, and lightning struck the water. So had I been a few seconds later, I would have been in water that was hit by lightning. I could have died. I could have been severely injured. Another instance I had was Sean and I were doing a gig in a military pool, and there was some sort of gas leak, and we had to be evacuated really quickly. There was no time for me to take the costume off. He just had to pull me and get me out of there as fast as he could. He was carrying me out while the lifeguards and firefighters were carrying gear in to deal with this spill. So that was really crazy, and it was a perfect example of how you don't always have the option to just get out of the costume, right? Like when it's an emergency, you go. So I am a big supporter of using wheelchairs. There's a lot of reasons for that, but first I want to talk about why some people feel that you shouldn't use a wheelchair. Some people feel that if you are not disabled, you should not be using a wheelchair. There's a number of reasons. One is that some people may not have the monetary ability to afford a wheelchair and they need it, which is terrible, and I totally agree that's a big problem. Another is that it may look bad, like you're using it as a gimmick. Maybe you want people to think you're disabled. I've never actually heard or seen anybody ever do that ever, except for these weird documentaries, which I'm still not even sure are true, where they find people who identify as disabled but they aren't disabled and they want to live as a disabled person. There's no mermaids doing that. So nobody's really doing that, but that's one of the concerns. Another is maybe you're making fun of disabled people. Again, I've never seen mermaids ever do this, but the second you say that, someone is going to be an idiot and do it. So, there are some valid concerns there, but I'd like to put forth the idea that wheelchairs were not exclusively made for people who are disabled. And there are other options out there, but they're not approved for people and they're not safe. And I want to give you some examples. So I used to suggest all the time using a dolly. And if you're stuck and you have nothing else, then yeah, you can totally still use a dolly. However, a dolly is not meant for people, and it has nothing to keep you safe the way a wheelchair has brakes, the way a wheelchair has the back wheels if you happen to go backwards. There's no seatbelt, there's nothing like that. Some wheelchairs have seatbelts. It's just a pallet that you're moving on wheels, okay? Sean and I have actually had several accidents as a result of using a dolly. Once he was pushing and the handles somehow became dislodged. Sean went backwards, the dolly went backwards, I went backwards, and in putting my hands out to try to stop myself because I did not have the same sense of balance because I've got this heavy tail, I broke 2 fingers and seriously cut my arm. So that, that right there is not great. Dollies also aren't really made for going on any terrain that's not perfectly flat and like asphalt. So it's really dangerous and not safe trying to get you up hills or grass or things like that. Like I said, they should be used as a last resort. Being carried, again, last resort. If it's an emergency and there's no time for anything else and someone has to get out of there, yes, lots of injuries happen picking things up. It is one of the #1 ways that falls happen, and it's like one of the things they say in fall prevention is eliminate the need to pick up things that are heavy from the floor. Falling is a big thing, slipping is another thing, and you kind of twist to catch yourself and you're holding a mermaid. Also hurting your back. So Sean and I have had many experiences where he's carried me, and even though we're being careful, he's slipped on something wet and we've both gone down and been hurt, or he's twisted himself and had to catch himself. Also, when you're carrying a mermaid and you've outstretched like that, it makes for a great photo, but then you kind of have to be careful. Your tail is like a hazard. You're hitting stuff, you're hitting property, you're hitting people. You can't always feel it because your tail's not real. And being carried around like that, it just opens you up for more injury as well. Sean seriously hurt his back one year and had to get treatment for it. So again, like, yeah, you can do it, but I don't know why you would do it if you had the opportunity to do something that was safer. I've seen other mermaids say things like use a wheelbarrow. Don't use a wheelbarrow. First of all, have fun getting tetanus from scraping yourself on the wheelbarrow. Not meant for people at all. No way to brake. Don't do that. Don't sit on a horse. I've heard some really crazy things. Here's why I think it's okay to use a wheelchair. Wheelchairs are meant for people when they cannot walk or, and this is key, as part of fall prevention. When I had my surgery, they made me use a wheelchair. I could walk. There was nothing wrong with me. But because I still had the effects of the anesthesia in my body and I was weak, they wanted me to use a wheelchair until it was out of my system because I was at a higher risk of falling, right? When women have babies, you know, they can walk. They're not disabled, but they're put in the wheelchair like as a fall prevention tactic. Elderly use the wheelchairs as a fall prevention tactic. Me having chronic pain, when I've had really bad chronic pain and it hurts too much to walk, I use a wheelchair. Sometimes it's not a matter of pain though. Sometimes it's not a matter of illness. Sometimes it's a matter of fatigue. Sometimes you're just tired, and there's people who being tired puts them at a fall risk. So if they have a chronic illness, or they are elderly, or they have another injury. Same thing with crutches. Crutches aren't just for disabled people. People use them for surgeries. They use them if they have to keep their weight off of something. Nobody's out there just using crutches to go, look, I'm using crutches, right? People, that's not how it works. The thing about wheelchairs is that they are approved for people. They have safety standards. They also are mobile, so they fold up to fit in a car and to fit in places so that you can easily take them with you to a gig, and much easier than trying to take a wheelbarrow to a gig, okay? Even dollies, most dollies are quite bigger than wheelchairs when you fold up a wheelchair. They do have braking systems. They do have built-in safety things to keep people from getting hurt. You can get a little foot stand to put your fin on so your fin is not dragging and so your fin is not flying around, gonna hit somebody else, okay? You can also use them on different terrain. They're not great on sand, but you can, I've gone uphill in them because of that safety locking system. I've gone on grass, I've gone through snow. And the idea is that the person should be picking you up as least amount as possible. And also, you want to try your best to set up your gigs so that you don't have to go this huge distance in between things, because it kind of does ruin the magic a bit, right? But there's still plenty of situations where in order for you to get from the space where you're performing to the space where you're changing, you use a wheelchair. And I have to tell you, it's, for the most part, it's not disabled people saying don't use wheelchairs. It did come up as one big controversial post recently. It was a person who used a wheelchair a lot, and her point was that it's not a gimmick. If you don't need it, you shouldn't use it. Maybe don't go in a parade in a wheelchair, you know, and maybe don't go spinning around in a wheelchair for the sake of it, kind of thing, if you don't need it. If you need it, that's fine, but it shouldn't be a gimmick. Look, I'm the mermaid in the wheelchair when you don't need it. Do you know what I mean? I think a wheelchair is your safest option that we have now. Some people have been able to invent things that are better. I know at the dive bar, They took an old, out of use motorized wheelchair and they completely overhauled it to be this turtle. And they call it Karma, and you can sit on Karma and drive her. She doesn't even look like a wheelchair. You wouldn't know it was a wheelchair by looking at it. It's amazing. I know that Lyndon was able to kind of do a dolly in the wheelchair combo and with this seashell backing, so it looks like she's sitting on a throne and she's being pulled in a throne, which is pretty cool. So this is the best option we have at the moment, and I believe we should be using it because it is the safest, and we are still using it for the intended purpose of fall prevention and injury prevention. You definitely want to be careful for that stuff. I participated in one of the safety studies out there on mermaiding, and one of the #1 things, I think #1 was ear infections, and I think #2 was falls. And falls are a big thing. People do not realize how serious falls can be until you have a bad one. You get concussions, you get broken bones, you get twists, you get pinched nerves. Your mermaid career could be over because of a fall. So yes, take it seriously, okay? I am being serious because you need to take it seriously. And from one person with an invisible disability to people who don't have it, I would much rather you use one and be safe than get carried around or thrown in a wheelbarrow because you're afraid that you're going to offend me, okay? It's all about the difference between need and gimmick. I think a good example of a gimmick might be like Bette Midler. She wore a mermaid tail for a concert and she wheeled herself around in a wheelchair, and that was a gimmick. Like Mermaid in the Wheelchair, that was a gimmick. Back then, we weren't as open to appropriation as we are now. She probably didn't think it was a big thing back then. I think Lady Gaga did one too, which was in homage to it. And looking back on it, we can kind of look at those things and be like, yeah, I mean, she really didn't need to be in a wheelchair. It was kind of a gimmick. So that's a good example, right? But when you are in a wheelchair because you're getting out of that pool quick because there's an emergency, or you're getting from point A to point B, that's fine, okay? And I will honestly argue with anyone who says otherwise, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of health and safety. And these are the options we have, and it is the safest option. It's still being used for its intended purpose. It's not harming people who are disabled. The only area in which it can be a big issue, what people brought up, was the cost. That is a societal issue that we have to tackle as a whole to make sure that people who genuinely need them for health and medical reasons are able to access them. There are programs for that you can support. You know, maybe you can offset it by fundraising in your community, using your mermaid stuff, donating a party, donating packages, something like that to help raise money for stuff like that. We do a lot of stuff like that. We work with the hospitals and everything, and it's great. I got my wheelchair, I traded a monofin for it. Literally, that's how I got our wheelchair. I went on a buy sell trade page and saw a person was, yeah, we had this because of an injury and we don't need it anymore. Open to a trade, and I was like, do you want 2 kids monofins? Your kids can be mermaids, and then this mermaid can have a wheelchair again. And that's what I did, right? And I've used wheelchairs throughout my life at different periods because of my chronic pain in my legs and because of surgeries and health reasons, and just I had a really hard time walking for a long time. I always joke that The Little Mermaid, the original story, says that, oh, you'll have legs, Little Mermaid, but it'll feel like they're breaking every time you take a step, and that is totally how I felt. It sucked. I'm doing a lot better now that I have my diseases under control, but I still have days where I can't walk because the pain is so bad. Just be safe, be smart, be respectful, okay? And hopefully we'll be able to, I don't know, come up with something better in the future, or maybe we won't need them because we'll be able to accommodate things better at gigs as our community gets more widely known. But for now, this is what we have. So that's my Raina's rant on mobile mermaids using wheelchairs, and that's how I feel about it, and hopefully nobody's gonna hate me after this. So anyway, if you did like it though, or you agreed with me, or if you have an countering viewpoint, I don't mind hearing countering viewpoints as long as people are respectful. Drop me a comment, let me know what you think. Maybe it's something I haven't considered before. Do you have an idea for something else people could use to get around at mermaid gigs that's safe, meant for people? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. Check us out on patreon.com/RainaMermaid. Even as little as $2 a month helps us do so much with the content that you're seeing here. So thank you so much for checking us out, and best wishes.